your life. To come into the full realization of your own awakened interior powers is to be able to condition your life in exact accord with what you would have it. Preface. There is a golden thread that runs through every religion in the world. There is a golden thread that runs through the lives and the teachings of all the prophets, seers, sages, and saviors in the world's history, through the lives of all men and women of truly great and lasting power. All that they have ever done or attained has been done in full accordance with law. What one has done, all may do. The same golden thread must enter into the lives of all who today, in this busy workaday world of ours, would exchange impotence for power, weakness and suffering for abounding health and strength, pain and unrest for perfect peace, poverty of whatever nature for fullness and plenty. Each is building his own world. We both build from within and we attract from without. Thought is the force with which we build, for thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. In the degree that thought is spiritualized, does it become more subtle and powerful in its workings. This spiritualizing is in accordance with law and is within the power of all. Everything is first worked out in the unseen before it is manifested in the seen, in the ideal before it is realized in the real, in the spiritual before it shows forth in the material. The realm of the unseen is the realm of cause. The realm of the seen is the realm of effect. The nature of effect is always determined and conditioned by the nature of its cause. To point out the great facts in connection with and the great laws underlying the workings of the interior, spiritual thought forces, to point them out so simply and so clearly that even a child can understand is the author's aim. To point them out so simply and so clearly that all can grasp them, that all can take them and infuse them into everyday life, so as to mold it in all its details in accordance with what they would have it, is his purpose. That life can be thus molded by them is not a matter of mere speculation or theory with him, but a matter of positive knowledge. There is a divine sequence running throughout the universe. Within and above and below the human will incessantly works the divine will. To come into harmony with it, and thereby with all the higher laws and forces, to come then into league and to work in conjunction with them, in order that they can work in league and in conjunction with us, is to come into the chain of this wonderful sequence. This is the secret of all success. This is to come into the possession of unknown riches, into the realization of undreamed of powers. RWT. Fullness of peace, power, and plenty. Prelude. The optimist is right. The pessimist is right. The one differs from the other as the light from the dark, yet both are right. Each is right from his own particular point of view, and this point of view is the determining factor in the life of each. It determines as to whether it is a life of power or of impotence, of peace or of pain, of success or of failure. The optimist has the power of seeing things in their entirety and in their right relations. The pessimist looks from a limited and a one-sided point of view. The one has his understanding illumined by wisdom. The understanding of the other is darkened by ignorance. Each is building his world from within, and the result of the building is determined by the point of view of each. The optimist, by his superior wisdom and insight, is making his own heaven, and in the degree that he makes his own heaven, is he helping to make one for all the world beside. The pessimist, by virtue of his limitations, is making his own hell, and in the degree that he makes his own hell, is he helping to make one for all mankind. You and I have the predominating characteristics of an optimist, or the predominating characteristics of a pessimist. We then are making, hour by hour, our own heaven or our own hell. And in the degree that we are making the one or the other for ourselves, are we helping make it for all the world beside. The word heaven means harmony. The word hell is from the Old English hell, meaning to build a wall around, to separate. To be held was to be shut off from. Now, if there is such a thing as harmony, there must be that something one can be in right relations with. For to be in right relations with anything is to be in harmony with it. Again, if there is such a thing as being held, shut off, separated from, There must be that something from which one is held, shut off, or separated. The supreme fact of the universe. The great central fact of the universe is that spirit of infinite life and power that is back of all, that animates all, that manifests itself in and through all, that self-existent principle of life from which all has come, and not only from which all has come, but from which all is continually coming. If there is an individual life, there must of necessity be an infinite source of life from which it comes. If there is a quality or a force of love, there must of necessity be an infinite source of love whence it comes. If there is wisdom, there must be the all-wise source back of it from which it springs. The same is true in regard to peace, the same in regard to power, the same in regard to what we call material things. There is, then, this spirit of infinite life and power back of all, which is the source of all. This infinite power is creating, working, ruling through the agency of great immutable laws and forces that run through all the universe, that surround us on every side. Every act of our everyday lives is governed by these same great laws and forces. Every flower that blooms by the wayside springs up, grows, blooms, fades according to certain great immutable laws. Every snowflake that plays between earth and heaven forms, falls, melts, according to certain great unchangeable laws. In a sense, there is nothing in all the great universe but law. If this is true, there must of necessity be a force behind it all that is the maker of these laws, and a force greater than the laws that are made. This spirit of infinite life and power that is back of all is what I call God. I care not what term you may use, be it kindly light, providence, the oversoul, omnipotence, or whatever term may be most convenient. I care not what the term may be, as long as we are agreed in regard to the great central fact itself. God, then, is this infinite spirit which fills all the universe with himself alone, so that all is from him and in him, and there is nothing that is outside. Indeed, and in truth then, in him we live and move and have our being. He is the life of our very life itself. We have received, we are continually receiving our life from him. We are partakers of the life of God, and though we differ from him in that we are individualized spirits, while he is the infinite spirit including us as well as all else beside, yet in essence the life of God and the life of man are identically the same, and so are one. They differ not in essence, in quality, they differ in degree. There have been and are highly illumined souls who believe that we receive our life from God after the manner of a divine inflow. And again, there have been and are those who believe that our life is one with the life of God, and so that God and man are one. Which is right? Both are right. Both right when rightly understood. In regard to the first, if God is the infinite spirit of life back of all, whence all comes, then clearly our life as individualized spirits is continually coming from this infinite source by means of this divine inflow. In the second place, if our lives as individualized spirits are directly from, are parts of this infinite spirit of life, then the degree of the infinite and quality with that source, the same as a drop of water taken from the ocean is, in nature, in characteristics, identical with that ocean, its source. And how could it be otherwise? Is this, in that although the life of God and the life of man in essence are identically the same, the life of God so far transcends the life of individual man that it includes all else beside. In other words, so far as the quality of life is concerned, in essence, they are the same. So far as the degree of life is concerned, they are vastly different. In this light, is it not then evident that both conceptions are true, and more, that they are one and the same? Both conceptions may be typified by one and the same illustration. There is a reservoir in a valley which receives its supply from an inexhaustible reservoir on the mountainside. It is then true that the reservoir in the valley receives its supply by virtue of the inflow of the water from the larger reservoir on the mountainside. It is also true that the water in this smaller reservoir is in nature, in quality, in characteristics identically the same as that in the larger reservoir, which is its source. The difference, however, is this: the reservoir on the mountainside, in the amount of its water, so far transcends the reservoir in the valley that it can supply an innumerable number of like reservoirs and still be unexhausted. And so, in the life of man. If, as I think we have already agreed, however, we may differ in regard to anything else, there is this infinite spirit of life back of all, the life of all, and so, from which all comes. Then, the life of individual man, your life and mine, must come by a divine inflow from this infinite source. And if this is true, then the life that comes by this inflow to man is necessarily the same in essence as is this infinite spirit of life. There is a difference. It is not a difference in essence. It is a difference in degree. If this is true, does it not follow that in the degree that man opens himself to this divine inflow, does he approach to God? If so, it then necessarily follows that in the degree that he makes this approach, does he take on the God powers? And if the God powers are without limit, does it not follow that the only limitations man has are the limitations he sets to himself by virtue of not knowing himself? The supreme fact of human life. From the great central fact of the universe in regard to which we have agreed, namely, this spirit of infinite life that is back of all, and from which all comes, we are led to inquire as to what is the great central fact in human life. From what has gone before, the question almost answers itself. The great central fact in human life, in your life and in mine, is the coming into a conscious, vital realization of our oneness with this infinite life, and the opening of ourselves fully to this divine inflow. This is the great central fact of human life, for in this all else is included, all else follows in its train. In just the degree that we come into a conscious realization of our oneness with the infinite life and open ourselves to this divine inflow, do we actualize in ourselves the qualities and powers of the infinite life. And what does this mean? It means simply this: that we are recognizing our true identity, that we are bringing our lives into harmony with the same great laws and forces, and so opening ourselves to the same great inspirations as have all the prophets, seers, sages, and saviors in the world's history, all men of truly great and mighty power. For in the degree that we come into this realization and connect ourselves with this infinite source, do we make it possible for the higher powers to play, to work, to manifest through us. We can keep close to this divine inflow, to these higher forces and powers through ignorance, as most of us do, and thus hinder or even prevent their manifesting through us. Or we can intentionally close ourselves to their operations and thus deprive ourselves of the powers to which, by the very nature of our being, we are rightful heirs. On the other hand, we can come into so vital a realization of the oneness of our real selves with this infinite life, and can open ourselves so fully to the incoming of this divine inflow, and so to the operation of these higher forces, inspirations, and powers, that we can indeed and in truth become what we may well term God-men. And what is a God-man? One in whom the powers of God are manifesting, though yet a man. No one can set limitations to a man or a woman of this type, for the only limitations he or she can have are those set by the self. Ignorance is the most potent factor in setting limitations to the majority of mankind, and so the great majority of people continue to live their little, dwarfed, and stunted lives simply by virtue of the fact that they do not realize the larger life to which they are heirs. They have never as yet come into a knowledge of the real identity of their true selves. Mankind has not yet realized that the real self is one with the life of God. Through its ignorance, it has never yet opened itself to the divine inflow, and so has never made itself a channel through which the infinite powers and forces can manifest. When we know ourselves merely as men, we live accordingly, and have merely the powers of men. When we come into the realization of the fact that we are God-men, then again we live accordingly, and have the powers of God-men. In the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, are we changed from mere men into God-men. A friend has a beautiful lotus pond. A natural basin on his estate, his farm as he always calls it, is supplied with water from a reservoir in the foothills some distance away. A gate regulates the flow of water from the main that conducts it from the reservoir to the pond. It is a spot of transcendent beauty. There, through the days of the perfect summer weather, the lotus flowers lie full blown upon the surface of the clear, transparent water. The June roses and other wildflowers are continually blooming upon its banks. The birds come here to drink and to bathe, and from early until late, one can hear the melody of their song. The bees are continually at work in this garden of wildflowers, a beautiful grove in which many kinds of wild berries and many varieties of brakes and ferns grow, stretches back of the pond as far as the eye can reach. Our friend is a man, nay, more, a God-man, a lover of his kind, and as a consequence, no notice bearing such words as private grounds, no trespassing allowed, or trespassers will be prosecuted, stands on his estate. But at the end of a beautiful byway that leads through the wild wood up to this enchanting spot stands a notice bearing the words, "All are welcome to the lotus pond." All love our friend. Why? They can't help it. He so loves them, and what is his is theirs. Here one may often find merry groups of children at play. Here many times tired and weary-looking men and women come, and somehow, when they go, their faces wear a different expression. The burden seems to be lifted, and now and then I have heard them when leaving, sometimes in a faint murmur, as if uttering a benediction, say, "God bless our brother friend." Many speak of this spot as the Garden of God. My friend calls it his soul garden, and he spends many hours in quiet here. Often have I seen him after the others have gone, walking to and fro, or sitting quietly in the clear moonlight on an old rustic bench, drinking in the perfume of the wildflowers. He is a man of a beautifully simple nature. He says that here the real things of life come to him, and that here his greatest and most successful plans, many times as by a flash of inspiration, suggest themselves to him. Everything in the immediate vicinity seems to breathe a spirit of kindliness, comfort, goodwill, and good cheer. The very cattle and sheep, as they come to the old stone fence at the edge of the grove and look across to this beautiful spot, seem indeed to get the same enjoyment that the people are getting. They seem almost to smile in the realization of their contentment and enjoyment, or perhaps it seems so to the onlooker, because he can scarcely help smiling as he sees the manifested evidence of their contentment and pleasure. The gate of the pond is always open wide enough to admit a supply of water so abundant that it continually overflows a quantity sufficient to feed a stream that runs through the fields below, giving the pure mountain water in drink to the cattle and flocks that are grazing there. The stream then flows on through the neighbors' fields. Not long ago, our friend was absent for a year. He rented his estate during his absence to a man who, as the world goes, was of a very practical turn of mind. He had no time for anything that did not bring him direct practical returns. The gate connecting the reservoir with the lotus pond was shut down, and no longer had the crystal mountain water the opportunity to feed and overflow it. The notice of our friend, "All are welcome to the lotus pond," was removed, and no longer were the gay companies of children and of men and women seen at the pond. A great change came over everything. On account of the lack of the life-giving water, the flowers in the pond wilted, and their long stems lay stretched upon the mud in the bottom. The fish that formerly swam in its clear water soon died, and gave an offensive odor to all who came near. The flowers no longer bloomed on its banks. The birds no longer came to drink and to bathe. No longer was heard the hum of the bees, and more, the stream that ran through the fields below dried up, so that the cattle and the flocks no longer got their supply of clear mountain water. The difference between the spot now and the lotus pond when our friend gave it his careful attention was caused, as we readily see, by the shutting of the gate to the pond, thus preventing the water from the reservoir in the hills, which was the source of its life, from entering it. And when this, the source of its life, was shut off, not only was the appearance of the lotus pond entirely changed, but the surrounding fields were deprived of the stream to whose banks the flocks and cattle came for drink. In this do we not see a complete parallel so far as human life is concerned? In the degree that we recognize our oneness, our connection with the infinite spirit, which is the life of all, and in the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, do we come into harmony with the highest, the most powerful, and the most beautiful everywhere? And in the degree that we do this, do we overflow so that all who come in contact with us receive the effects of this realization on our part? This is the lotus pond of our friend, he who is in love with all that is truest and best in the universe. And in the degree that we fail to recognize our oneness with this infinite source, and so shut ourselves to this divine inflow, do we come into that state where there seems to be with us nothing of good, nothing of beauty, nothing of power, and when this is true, those who come in contact with us receive not good, but harm. This is the spot of the lotus pond while the farm was in the hands of a renter. There is this difference between the lotus pond and your life and mine. It has no power in itself of opening the gate to the inflow of the water from the reservoir, which is its source. In regard to this, it is helpless and dependent upon an outside agency. You and I have the power within us to open or to close ourselves to this divine inflow exactly as we choose. This we have through the power of mind, through the operation of thought. There is the soul life, direct from God. This it is that relates us to the infinite. There is, then, the physical life. This it is that relates us to the material universe about us. The thought life connects the one with the other. It is this that plays between the two. Before we proceed farther, let us consider very briefly the nature of thought. Thought is not, as is many times supposed, a mere indefinite abstraction, or something of a like nature. It is, on the contrary, a vital, living force, the most vital, subtle, and irresistible force there is in the universe. In our very laboratory experiments, we are demonstrating the great fact that thoughts are forces. They have form and quality and substance and power. And we are beginning to find that there is what we may term a science of thought. We are beginning also to find that through the instrumentality of our thought forces, we have creative power, not merely in a figurative sense, but creative power in reality. Everything in the material universe about us, everything the universe has ever known, had its origin first in thought. From this, it took its form. Every castle, every statue, every painting, every piece of mechanism, everything had its birth, its
That be the
origin,
mind of a
first in the
typical
mind of the one who
wasteland.
formed it, before it received its material expression or embodiment. This very universe in which we live.
You see, these books is knowledge. These books is informational. You feel me? Educational purpose only. So everybody out there, make sure that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe. These books is educational purpose only. You feel me? A lot of people need this education. Some of y'all might not feel you need it. So keep it moving. You feel me? At the end of the day, let's keep going.
Live is the result of the thought energies of God, the infinite spirit that is back of all. And if it is true, as we have found, that we in our true selves are in essence the same, and in this sense are one with the life of this infinite spirit, do we not then see that in the degree that we come into a vital realization of this stupendous fact, we, through the operation of our interior, spiritual thought forces, have in like sense creative power? Everything exists in the unseen before it is manifested or realized in the seen. And in this sense, it is true that the unseen things are the real, while the things that are seen are the unreal. The unseen things are cause, the seen things are effect. The unseen things are the eternal, the seen things are the changing, the transient. The power of the word is a literal scientific fact. Through the operation of our thought forces, we have creative power. The spoken word is nothing more nor less than the outward expression of the workings of these interior forces. The spoken word is then, in a sense, the means whereby the thought forces are focused and directed along any particular line. And this concentration, this giving them direction, is necessary before any outward or material manifestation of their power can become evident. Much is said in regard to building castles in the air, and one who is given to this building is not always looked upon with favor. But castles in the air are always necessary before we can have castles on the ground, before we can have castles in which to live. The trouble with the one who gives himself to building castles in the air is not that he builds them in the air, but that he does not go farther and actualize in life, in character, in material form, the castles he thus builds. He does a part of the work, a very necessary part, but another equally necessary part remains still undone. There is, in connection with the thought forces, what we may term the drawing power of mind, and the great law operating here is one with that great law of the universe, that like attracts like. We are continually attracting to us from both the seen and the unseen side of life forces and conditions most akin to those of our own thoughts. This law is continually operating whether we are conscious of it or not. We are all living, so to speak, in a vast ocean of thought, and the very atmosphere around us is continually filled with the thought forces that are being continually sent or that are continually going out in the form of thought waves. We are all affected, more or less, by these thought forces, either consciously or unconsciously, and in the degree that we are more or less sensitively organized, or in the degree that we are negative and so are open to outside influences rather than positive, thus determining what influences shall enter into our realm of thought and hence into our lives. There are those among us who are much more sensitively organized than others. As an organism, their bodies are more finely, more sensitively constructed. These, generally speaking, are people who are always more or less affected by the mentalities of those with whom they come in contact, or in whose company they are. A friend, the editor of one of our great journals, is so sensitively organized that it is impossible for him to attend a gathering, such as a reception, talk and shake hands with a number of people during the course of the evening, without taking on to a greater or less extent their various mental and physical conditions. These affect him to such an extent that he is scarcely himself and in his best condition for work until some 2 or 3 days afterward. Some think it unfortunate for one to be sensitively organized. By no means. It is a good thing, for one may thus be more open and receptive to the higher impulses of the soul within, and to all higher forces and influences from without. It may, however, be unfortunate and extremely inconvenient to be so organized unless one recognize and gain the power of closing himself, of making himself positive to all detrimental or undesirable influences. This power, everyone, however sensitively organized he may be, can acquire. This he can acquire through the mind's action, and moreover, there is no habit of more value to anyone, be he sensitively or less sensitively organized, than that of occasionally taking and holding himself continually in the attitude of mind. I close myself. I make myself positive to all things below, and open and receptive to all higher influences, to all things above. By taking this attitude of mind consciously now and then, it soon becomes a habit, and if one is deeply earnest in regard to it, it puts into operation silent but subtle and powerful influences in affecting the desired results. In this way, all lower and undesirable influences from both the seen and the unseen side of life are closed out, while all higher influences are invited, and in the degree that they are invited, will they enter. And what is the unseen side of life? First, the thought forces, the mental and emotional conditions in the atmosphere about us that are generated by those manifesting on the physical plane through the agency of physical bodies. Second, the same forces generated by those who have dropped the physical body or from whom it has been struck away, and who are now manifesting through the agency of bodies of a different nature. The individual existence of man begins on the sense plane of the physical world, but rises through successive gradations of ethereal and celestial spheres, corresponding with his ever unfolding deific life and powers, to a destiny of unspeakable grandeur and glory. Within and above every physical planet is a corresponding ethereal planet, or soul world, as within and above every physical organism is a corresponding ethereal organism, or soul body, of which the physical is but the external counterpart and materialized expression. From this etherealized or soul planet, which is the immediate home of our arisen humanity, there rises or deepens in infinite gradations spheres within and above spheres, to celestial heights of spiritualized existence utterly inconceivable to the sense man. Embodiment, accordingly, is twofold. The physical being but the temporary husk, so to speak, in and by which the real and permanent ethereal organism is individualized and perfected, somewhat as the full corn in the ear is reached by means of its husk, for which there is no further use. By means of this indestructible ethereal body and the corresponding ethereal spheres of environment with the social life and relations in the spheres, the individuality and personal life is preserved forever. The fact of life, in whatever form, means the continuance of life, even though the form be changed. Life is the one eternal principle of the universe, and so always continues, even though the form of the agency through which it manifests be changed. Quote, "In my Father's house are many mansions," unquote. And surely, because the individual has dropped, has gone out of the physical body, there is no evidence at all that the life does not go right on the same as before, not commencing, for there is no cessation, but commencing in the other form, exactly where it is left off here. For all life is a continuous evolution, step by step. There, one neither skips nor jumps. There are in the other form, then, mentalities, and hence lives of all grades and influences, the same as there are in the physical form. If, then, the great law that like attracts like is ever operating, we are continually attracting to us from this side of life influences and conditions most akin to those of our own thoughts and lives. A gruesome thought that we should be so influenced, says one. By no means, all life is one. We are all bound together in the one common and universal life, and especially not when we take into consideration the fact that we have it entirely in our own hands to determine the order of thought we entertain, and consequently the order of influences we attract, and are not mere willowy creatures of circumstance, unless indeed we choose to be. In our mental lives, we can either keep hold of the rudder and so determine exactly what course we take, what points we touch, or we can fail to do this, and failing, we drift, and are blown hither and thither by every passing breeze. And so, on the contrary, welcome should be the thought, for thus we may draw to us the influence and the aid of the greatest, the noblest, and the best who have lived on the earth, whatever the time, wherever the place. We cannot rationally believe other than that those who have labored in love and with uplifting power here are still laboring in the same way, and in all probability with more earnest zeal and with still greater power. Quote, "And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha." Unquote. While riding with a friend a few days ago, we were speaking of the great interest people are everywhere taking in the more vital things of life, the eagerness with which they are reaching out for a knowledge of the interior forces, their ever-increasing desire to know themselves and to know their true relations with the infinite. And in speaking of the great spiritual awakening that is so rapidly coming all over the world, the beginnings of which we are so clearly seeing during the closing years of this, and whose ever-increasing proportions we are to witness during the early years of the coming century. I said, how beautiful if Emerson, the illumined one so far in advance of his time, who labored so faithfully and so fearlessly to bring about these very conditions, how beautiful if he were with us today to witness it all. How he would rejoice. How do we know, was the reply? That he is not witnessing it all, and more, that he is not having a hand in it all. A hand even greater, perhaps, than when we saw him here. Thank you, my friend, for this reminder. And truly, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who shall be heirs of salvation? As science is so abundantly demonstrating today, the things that we see are but a very small fraction of the things that are. The real vital forces at work in our own lives and in the world about us are not seen by the ordinary physical eye. Yet, they are the causes of which all things we see are merely the effects. Thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. For one to govern his thinking, then, is to determine his life. Says one of deep insight into the nature of things. The law of correspondences between spiritual and material things is wonderfully exact in its workings. People ruled by the mood of gloom attract to them gloomy things. People always discouraged and despondent do not succeed in anything, and live only by burdening someone else. The hopeful, confident, and cheerful attract the elements of success. A man's front or backyard will advertise that man's ruling mood in the way it is kept. A woman at home shows her state of mind in her dress. A slattern advertises the ruling mood of hopelessness, carelessness, and lack of system. Rags, tatters, and dirt are always in the mind before being on the body. The thought that is most put out brings its corresponding visible element to crystallize about you as surely and literally as the visible bit of copper in solution attracts it to the invisible copper in that solution. A mind always hopeful, confident, courageous, and determined on its set purpose, and keeping itself to that purpose, attracts to itself out of the elements things and powers favorable to that purpose. Every thought of yours has a literal value to you in every possible way. The strength of your body, the strength of your mind, your success in business, and the pleasure your company brings others depends on the nature of your thoughts. In whatever mood you set your mind, does your spirit receive of unseen substance in correspondence with that mood. It is as much a chemical law as a spiritual law. Chemistry is not confined to the elements we see. The elements we do not see with the physical eye outnumber 10,000 times those we do see. The Christ injunction, do good to those who hate you, is based on a scientific fact and a natural law. So to do good is to bring to yourself all the elements in nature of power and good. To do evil is to bring the contrary destructive elements. When our eyes are opened, self-preservation will make us stop all evil thought. Those who live by hate will die by hate. That is, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Every evil thought is as a sword drawn on the person to whom it is directed. If a sword is drawn in return, so much the worse for both. And says another who knows full well whereof he speaks. The law of attraction works universally on every plane of action, and we attract whatever we desire or expect. If we desire one thing and expect another, we become like houses divided against themselves, which are quickly brought to desolation. Determine resolutely to expect only what you desire, then you will attract only what you wish for. Carry any kind of thought you please about with you, and so long as you retain it, no matter how you roam over land or sea, you will unceasingly attract to yourself, knowingly or inadvertently, exactly and only what corresponds to your own dominant quality of thought. Thoughts are our private property, and we can regulate them to suit our taste entirely by steadily recognizing our ability so to do. We have just spoken of the drawing power of mind. Faith is nothing more nor less than the operation of the thought forces in the form of an earnest desire, coupled with expectation as to its fulfillment. And in the degree that faith, the earnest desire thus sent out, is continually held to and watered by firm expectation, in just that degree does it either draw to itself or does it change from the unseen into the visible, from the spiritual into the material, that for which it is sent. Let the element of doubt or fear enter in, and what would otherwise be a tremendous force will be so neutralized that it will fail of its realization. Continually held to and continually watered by firm expectation, it becomes a force, a drawing power that is irresistible and absolute. And the results will be absolute in direct proportion as it is absolute. We shall find, as we are so rapidly beginning to find today, that the great things said in regard to faith, the great promises made in connection with it, are not mere vague sentimentalities, but are all great scientific facts and rest upon great immutable laws. Even in our very laboratory experiments, we are beginning to discover the laws underlying and governing these forces. We are now beginning, some at least, to use them understandingly and not blindly, as has so often and so long been the case. Much is said today in regard to the will. It is many times spoken of as if it were a force in itself. But will is a force, a power, only insofar as it is a particular form of the manifestation of the thought forces. For it is by what we call the will that thought is focused and given a particular direction. And in the degree that thought is thus focused and given direction, is it effective in the work it is sent out to accomplish. In a sense, there are two kinds of will, the human and the divine. The human will is the will of what, for convenience sake, we may term the lower self. It is the will that finds its life merely in the realm of the mental and the physical, the sense will. It is the will of the one who is not yet awake to the fact that there is a life that far transcends the life of merely the intellect and the physical senses, and which, when realized and lived, does not do away with or minify these, but which, on the contrary, brings them to their highest perfection and to their powers of keenest enjoyment. The divine will is the will of the higher self, the will of the one who recognizes his oneness with the divine, and who consequently brings his will to work in harmony, in conjunction with the divine will. Quote, "The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty." Unquote. The human will has its limitations. So far and no farther, says the law. The divine will has no limitations. It is supreme. All things are open and subject to you, says the law. And so, in the degree that the human will is transmuted into the divine, in the degree that it comes into harmony with, and so acts in conjunction with the divine, does it become supreme. Then it is that, quote, "Thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee." Unquote. The great secret of life and of power, then, is to make and to keep one's conscious connection with this infinite source. The power of every life, the very life itself, is determined by what it relates itself to. God is immanent as well as transcendent. He is creating, working, ruling in the universe today, in your life and in mine, just as much as he ever has been. We are too apt to regard him after the manner of an absentee landlord, one who has set into operation the forces of the great universe, and then taken himself away. In the degree, however, that we recognize him as immanent as well as transcendent, are we able to partake of his life and power. For in the degree that we recognize him as the infinite spirit of life and power that is today, at this very moment, working and manifesting in and through all, and then, in the degree that we come into the realization of our oneness with this life, do we become partakers of, and so do we actualize in ourselves the qualities of his life. In the degree that we open ourselves to the inflowing tide of this immanent and transcendent life, do we make ourselves channels through which the infinite intelligence and power can work. It is through the instrumentality of the mind that we are enabled to connect the real soul life with the physical life, and so enable the soul life to manifest and work through the physical. The thought life needs continually to be illumined from within. This illumination can come in just the degree that through the agency of the mind, we recognize our oneness with the divine, of which each soul is an individual form of expression. This gives us the inner guiding which we call intuition. Intuition is to the spiritual nature and understanding practically what sense perception is to the sensuous nature and understanding. It is an inner spiritual sense through which man is open to the direct revelation and knowledge of God, the secrets of nature and life, and through which he is brought into conscious unity and fellowship with God, and made to realize his own deific nature and supremacy of being as the Son of God. Spiritual supremacy and illumination thus realized through the development and perfection of intuition under divine inspiration gives the perfect inner vision and direct insight into the character, properties, and purpose of all things to which the attention and interest are directed. It is, we repeat, a spiritual sense opening inwardly, as the physical senses open outwardly. And because it has the capacity to perceive, grasp, and know the truth at first hand, independent of all external sources of information, we call it intuition. All inspired teaching and spiritual revelations are based upon the recognition of this spiritual faculty of the soul and its power to receive and appropriate them. Conscious unity of man in spirit and purpose with the Father, born out of his supreme desire and trust, opens his soul through this inner sense to immediate inspiration and enlightenment from the divine omniscience and the cooperative energy of the divine omnipotence, under which he becomes a seer and a master. On this higher plane of realized spiritual life in the flesh, the mind holds the impersonal attitude and acts with unfettered freedom and unbiased vision, grasping truth at first hand, independent of all external sources of information. Approaching all beings and things from the divine side, they are seen in the light of the divine omniscience, God's purpose in them, and so the truth concerning them, as it rests in the mind of God, are thus revealed by direct illumination from the divine mind, to which the soul is opened inwardly through this spiritual sense we call intuition. Some call it the voice of the soul, some call it the voice of God, some call it the sixth sense. It is our inner spiritual sense. In the degree that we come into the recognition of our own true selves, into the realization of the oneness of our life with the infinite life, and in the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, does this voice of intuition, this voice of the soul, this voice of God speak clearly. And in the degree that we recognize, listen to, and obey it, does it speak ever more clearly, until by and by there comes the time when it is unerring, absolutely unerring in its guidance. Fullness of life, bodily health and vigor. God is the spirit of infinite life. If we are partakers of this life and have the power of opening ourselves fully to its divine inflow, it means more, so far as even the physical life is concerned, than we may at first think. For very clearly, the life of this infinite spirit, from its very nature, can admit of no disease, and if this is true, no disease can exist in the body where it freely enters, through which it freely flows. Let us recognize at the outset that so far as the physical life is concerned, all life is from within out. There is an immutable law which says, as within, so without, cause effect. In other words, the thought forces, the various mental states and the emotions all have in time their effects upon the physical body. Someone says, I hear a great deal said today in regard to the effects of the mind upon the body, but I don't know as I place very much confidence in this. Don't you? Someone brings you sudden news. You grow pale, you tremble, or perhaps you fall into a faint. It is, however, through the channel of your mind the news is imparted to you. A friend says something to you, perhaps at the table, something that, but from this moment, your appetite, the channel of your mind. Look, yonder goes a young man, dragging his feet, stumbling over the slightest obstruction in the path. Why is it? Simply that he is weak-minded, an idiot. In other words, a falling state of mind is productive of a falling condition of the body. Mind is to be uncertain in step. Again, a sudden emergency arises. You stand trembling and weak with fear. Why are you powerless to move? Why do you tremble? And yet you believe that the mind has but little influence upon the body. You are, for a moment, dominated by a fit of anger. For a few hours afterwards, you complain of a violent headache, and still you do not seem to realize that the thoughts and emotions have an effect upon the body. A day or two ago, while conversing with a friend, we were speaking of worry. My father is greatly given to worry, he said. Your father is not a healthy man, I said. He is not strong, vigorous, robust, and active. I then went on to describe to him more fully his father's condition and the troubles which afflicted him. He looked at me in surprise and said, Why, you do not know my father? No, I replied. How then can you describe so accurately the disease with which he is afflicted? You've just told me that your father is greatly given to worry. When you told me this, you indicated to me cause. In describing your father's condition, I simply connected with the cause of its own peculiar effects. Fear and worry have the effect of closing up the channels of the body, so that the life forces flow in a slow and sluggish manner. Hope and tranquility open the channels of the body, so that the life forces go bounding through it in such a way that disease can rarely get a foothold. Not long ago, a lady was telling a friend of a serious physical trouble. My friend happened to know that between this lady and her sister, the most kindly relations did not exist. He listened attentively to her delineation of her troubles, and then, looking her squarely in the face, in a firm but kindly tone, said, Forgive your sister. The woman looked at him in surprise and said, I can't forgive my sister. Very well, then, he replied. Keep the stiffness of your joints and your kindred rheumatic troubles. A few weeks later, he saw her again. With a light step, she came toward him and said, I took your advice. I saw my sister and forgave her. We have become good friends again, and I don't know how it is, but somehow or other, from the very day as I remember that we became reconciled, my troubles seemed to grow less, and today there is not a trace of the old difficulties left. And really, my sister and I have become such good friends that now we can scarcely get along without one another. Again, we have effect following cause. We have several well-authenticated cases of the following nature. A mother has been dominated for a few moments by an intense passion of anger, and the child at her breast has died within an hour's time. So poisoned became the mother's milk by virtue of the poisonous secretions of the system while under the domination of this fit of anger. In other cases, it has caused severe illness and convulsions. The following experiment has been tried a number of times by a well-known scientist. Several men have been put into a heated room. Each man has been dominated for a moment by a particular passion of some kind, one by an intense passion of anger, and others by different other passions. The experimenter has taken a drop of perspiration from the body of each of these men, and by means of a careful chemical analysis, he has been able to determine the particular passion by which each has been dominated. Practically, the same results revealed themselves in the chemical analysis of the saliva of each of the men. Says a noted American author, an able graduate of one of our greatest medical schools, and one who has studied deeply into the forces that build the body and the forces that tear it down. The mind is the natural protector of the body. Every thought tends to reproduce itself, and ghastly mental pictures of disease, sensuality, and vice of all sorts produce scrofula and leprosy in the soul, which reproduces them in the body. Anger changes the chemical properties of the saliva to a poison dangerous to life. It is well known that sudden and violent emotions have not only weakened the heart in a few hours, but have caused death and insanity. It has been discovered by scientists that there is a chemical difference between that sudden cold exudation of a person under a deep sense of guilt and the ordinary perspiration. And the state of the mind can sometimes be determined by chemical analysis of the perspiration of a criminal, which, when brought into contact with selenic acid, produces a distinctive pink color. It is well known that fear has killed thousands of victims, while on the other hand, courage is a great invigorator. Anger in the mother may poison a nursing child. Rarey, the celebrated horse tamer, said that an angry word would sometimes raise the pulse of a horse 10 beats in a minute. If this is true of a beast, what can we say of its power upon human beings, especially upon a child? Strong mental emotion often causes vomiting. Extreme anger or fright may produce jaundice. A violent paroxysm of rage has caused apoplexy and death. Indeed, in more than one instance, a single night of mental agony has wrecked a life. Grief, long-standing jealousy, constant care, and corroding anxiety sometimes tend to develop insanity. Sick thoughts and discordant moods are the natural atmosphere of disease, and crime is engendered and thrives in the miasma of the mind. From this, we get the great fact we are scientifically demonstrating today, that the various mental states, emotions, and passions have their various peculiar effects upon the body, and each induces in turn, if indulged in to any great extent, its own peculiar forms of disease, and these in time become chronic. Just a word or two in regard to their mode of operation. If a person is dominated for a moment by, say, a passion of anger, there is set up in the physical organism what we might justly term a bodily thunderstorm, which has the effect of souring, or rather of corroding the normal, healthy, and life-giving secretions of the body, so that instead of performing their natural functions, they become poisonous and destructive. And if this goes on to any great extent, by virtue of their cumulative influences, they give rise to a particular form of disease, which in turn becomes chronic. So the motion opposite to this, that of kindness, love, benevolence, goodwill, tends to stimulate a healthy, purifying, and life-giving flow of all the bodily secretions. All the channels of the body seem free and open. The life forces go bounding through them. And these very forces, set into abounding activity, will in time counteract the poisonous and disease-giving effects of their opposites. A physician goes to see a patient. He gives no medicine this morning, yet the very fact of his going makes the patient better. He has carried with him the spirit of health. He has carried brightness of tone and disposition. He has carried hope into the sick chamber. He has left it there. In fact, the very hope and good cheer he has carried with him has taken hold of and has had a subtle but powerful influence upon the mind of the patient, and this mental condition imparted by the physician has in turn its effects upon the patient's body. And so, through the instrumentality of this mental suggestion, the healing goes on. Quote, "Know then, whatever cheerful and serene supports the mind, supports the body too. Hence, the most vital movement mortals feel is hope, the balm and lifeblood of the soul." Unquote. We sometimes hear a person in weak health say to another, "I always feel better when you come." There is a deep scientific reason underlying the statement. The tongue of the wise is health. The power of suggestion, so far as the human mind is concerned, is a most wonderful and interesting field of study. Most wonderful and powerful forces can be set into operation through this agency. One of the world's most noted scientists, recognized everywhere as one of the most eminent anatomists living, tells us that he has proven from laboratory experiments that the entire human structure can be completely changed, made over, within a period of less than 1 year, and that some portions can be entirely remade within a period of a few weeks. Do you mean to say, I hear it asked, that the body can be changed from a diseased to a healthy condition through the operation of the interior forces? Most certainly. And more, this is the natural method of cure. The method that has as its work the application of drugs, medicines, and external agencies is the artificial method. The only thing that any drug or medicine can do is to remove obstructions, that the life forces may have simply a better chance to do their work. The real healing process must be performed by the operation of the life forces within. A surgeon and physician of worldwide fame recently made to his medical associates the following declaration. For generations past, the most important influence that plays upon nutrition, the life principle itself, has remained an unconsidered element in the medical profession, and the almost exclusive drift of its studies and remedial paraphernalia has been confined to the action of matter over mind. This has seriously interfered with the evolutionary tendencies of the doctors themselves, and consequently, the psychic factor in professional life is still in a rudimentary or comparatively undeveloped state. But the light of the 19th century has dawned, and so the march of mankind in general is taken in the direction of the hidden forces of nature. Doctors are now compelled to join the ranks of students in psychology and follow their patrons into the broader field of mental therapeutics. There is no time for lingering, no time for skepticism or doubt or hesitation. He who lingers is lost, for the entire race is enlisted in the movement. I am aware of the fact that in connection with the matter we are now considering, there has been a great deal of foolishness during the past few years. Many absurd and foolish things have been claimed and done, but this says nothing against, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the great underlying laws themselves. The same has been true of the early days of practically every system of ethics or philosophy or religion the world has ever known. But as time has passed, these foolish, absurd things have fallen away, and the great eternal principles have stood out ever more and more clearly defined. I know personally of many cases where an entire and permanent cure has been effected, in some within a remarkably short period of time, through the operation of these forces. Some of them are cases that had been entirely given up by the regular practice, materia medica. We have numerous accounts of such cases in all times and in connection with all religions. And why should not the power of effecting such cures exist among us today? The power does exist, and it will be actualized in just the degree that we recognize the same great laws that were recognized in times past. One person may do a very great deal in connection with the healing of another, but this almost invariably implies cooperation on the part of the one who is thus treated. In the cures that Christ performed, he most always needed the cooperation of the one who appealed to him. His question almost invariably was, "Dost thou believe?" He thus stimulated into activity the life-giving forces within the one cured. If one is in a very weak condition, or if his nervous system is exhausted, or if his mind through the influence of the disease is not so strong in its workings, it may be well for him for a time to seek the aid and cooperation of another. But it would be far better for such a one could he bring himself to a vital realization of the omnipotence of his own interior powers. One may cure another, but to be permanently healed, one must do it himself. In this way, another may be most valuable as a teacher by bringing one to a clear realization of the power of the forces within. But in every case, in order to have a permanent cure, the work of the self is necessary. Christ's words were almost invariably, "Go and sin no more," or "Thy sins are forgiven thee," thus pointing out the one eternal and never-changing fact, that all disease and its consequent suffering is the direct or the indirect result of the violation of law, either consciously or unconsciously, either intentionally or unintentionally. Suffering is designed to continue only so long as sin continues. Sin not necessarily in the theological, but always in the philosophical sense, though many times in the sense of both. The moment the violation ceases, the moment one comes into perfect harmony with the law, the cause of the suffering ceases. And though there may be residing within the cumulative effects of past violation, the cause is removed, and consequently, there can be no more effects in the form of additions, and even the disease condition that has been induced from past violation will begin to disappear as soon as the right forces are set into activity. There is nothing that will more quickly and more completely bring one into harmony with the laws under which he lives than this vital realization of his oneness with the infinite spirit, which is the life of all life. In this, there can be no disease, and nothing will more readily remove from the organism the obstructions that have accumulated there, or in other words, the disease that resides there, than this full realization and the complete opening of oneself to this divine inflow. Quote, "I shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live." Unquote. The moment a person realizes his oneness with the infinite spirit, he recognizes himself as a spiritual being, and no longer as a mere physical, material being. He then no longer makes the mistake, but he realizes the fact that he is spirit. Spirit now as much as he ever will or can be, and that he is the builder, and so the master of the body, the house in which he lives. And the moment he thus recognizes his power as master, he ceases in any way to allow it the mastery over him. He no longer fears the elements or any of the forces that he now, in his ignorance, allows to take hold of and affect the body. The moment he realizes his own supremacy, instead of fearing them as he did when he was out of harmony with them, he learns to love them. He thus comes into harmony with them. Or rather, he so orders them that they come into harmony with him. He who formerly was the slave has now become the master. The moment we come to love a thing, it no longer carries harm for us. There are almost countless numbers today, weak and suffering in the body, who would become strong and healthy if they would only give God an opportunity to do his work. To such, I would say, don't shut out the divine inflow. Do anything else rather than this. Open yourselves to it, invite it. In the degree that you open yourselves to it, its inflowing tide instructions that are dominating them today will be driven out before it. Quote, "My words are life to them that find them, and health to all their flesh." Unquote. There is a trough through which a stream of muddy water has been flowing for many days. The dirt is gradually collected on its sides and bottom, and it continues to collect as long as the muddy water flows through it. Change this. Open the trough to a swift-flowing stream of clear, crystal water, and in a very little while, even the very dirt that has collected on its sides and bottom will be carried away. The trough will be entirely cleansed. It will present an aspect of beauty and no longer an aspect of ugliness. And more, the water that now courses through it will be of value. It will be an agent of refreshment, of health, and of strength to those who use it. Yes, in just the degree that you realize your oneness with this infinite spirit of life, and thus actualize your latent possibilities and powers, you will exchange dis-ease for ease, inharmony for harmony, suffering and pain for abounding health and strength. And in the degree that you realize this wholeness, this abounding health and strength in yourself, will you carry it to all with whom you come in contact. For we must remember that health is contagious as well as disease. I hear it asked, what can be said in a concrete way in regard to the practical application of these truths, so that one can hold himself in the enjoyment of perfect bodily health, and more, that one may heal himself of any existing disease? In reply, let it be said that the chief thing that can be done is to point out the great underlying principle, and that each individual must make his own application. One person cannot well make this for another. First, let it be said that the very fact of one's holding the thought of perfect health sets into operation vital forces which will, in time, be more or less productive of the effect, perfect health. Then, speaking more directly in regard to the great principle itself, from its very nature, it is clear that more can be accomplished through the process of realization than through the process of affirmation, though for some, affirmation may be a help, an aid to realization. In the degree, however, that you come into a vital realization of your oneness with the infinite spirit of life, whence all life in individual form has come and is continually coming, and in the degree that through this realization you open yourself to its divine inflow, do you set into operation forces that will sooner or later bring even the physical body into a state of abounding health and strength. For to realize that this infinite spirit of life can from its very nature admit of no disease, and to realize that this then is the life in you, by realizing your oneness with it, you can so open yourself to its more abundant entrance that the diseased bodily conditions, effects, will respond to the influences of its all-perfect power, this either quickly or more tardily, depending entirely upon yourself. There have been those who have been able to open themselves up so fully to this realization that the healing has been instantaneous and permanent. The degree of intensity always eliminates in like degree the element of time. It must, however, be a calm, quiet, and expectant intensity, rather than an intensity that is fearing, disturbed, and non-expectant. Then there are others who have come to this realization by degrees. Many will receive great help, and many will be entirely healed by a practice somewhat after the following nature. With a mind at peace, and with a heart going out in love to all, go into the quiet of your own interior self, holding the thought, I am one with the infinite spirit of life, the life of my life. I then, as spirit, I, a spiritual being, can in my own real nature admit of no disease. I now open my body, in which disease has gotten a foothold. I open it fully to the inflowing tide of this infinite life, and it now, even now, is going on. Realize this so fully that you begin to feel a quickening. The healing process is going on, Believe it and hold continually to it. Many people greatly desire a certain thing, but expect something else. They have greater faith in the power of evil than in the power of good, and hence remain ill. If one will give himself to this meditation, realization, treatment, or whatever term it may seem best to use at stated times, as often as he may choose, thus allowing the force to work continually, he will be surprised how rapidly the body will be exchanging conditions of disease and inharmony for health and harmony. There is no particular reason, however, for this surprise, for in this way he is simply allowing the omnipotent power to do the work, which will have to do it ultimately in any case. If there is a local difficulty and one wants to open this particular portion, in addition to the entire body, to this inflowing life, he can hold this particular portion in thought, or to fix the thought in this way upon any particular portion of the body stimulates or increases the flow of the life forces in that portion. It must always be borne in mind, however, that whatever healing may be thus accomplished, effects will not permanently cease until causes have been removed. In other words, as long as there is the violation of law, so long disease and suffering will result. This realization that we are considering will have an influence not only where there is a disease condition of the body, bodily life, vigor, and power, of healing through the operation of the interior forces, entirely independent of external agencies. Various have been the methods, or rather, various have been the names applied to them, but the great law underlying all is one and the same today. When the Master sent his followers forth, his injunction to them was to heal the sick and the afflicted, as well as to teach the people. The early church fathers had the power of healing. In short, it was a part of their work. And why should we not have the power today, identically the same? Why then? Simply because, with a few rare exceptions here and there, we are unable to get beyond the mere letter of the law into its real vital spirit and power. It is the letter that it is the spirit that giveth life and power. Every soul who becomes so individualized that he breaks through the mere letter and enters into the real vital spirit will have the power, as have all who have gone before. And when he does, he one who will move and who will speak with authority. We are rapidly finding today practically perverted mental and emotional states and conditions. The mental and its effects upon us. If we fear it, or if we antagonize it, the chances are that it will have detrimental or even disastrous effects upon us. If we come into harmony with it by quietly recognizing the degree that we are able successfully to do this, in that degree will it carry with it no injury for us. No disease can enter into or bodies unless it find therein something corresponding to itself which makes it possible. And in the same way, no evil or undesirable condition of any kind invites it, and so makes it possible for it to come. The sooner we begin to look within ourselves for the cause of whatever comes to us, the better it will be. For so much the sooner we will begin to make conditions within ourselves such that only good may enter. We, who from our very natures should be masters of all conditions, by virtue of our ignorance, are mastered by almost numberless conditions of every description. We fear a dragon.
Okay, gang. Now that is an interesting book. No doubt. Definitely. I almost think it's interesting, like more interesting than the last one, you feel me? The powers of the subconscious mind. It's almost there. But we're gonna continue on tomorrow in another live. So let's all remember we stopped at chapter 3. What's that? We're gonna continue tomorrow. Take care, stay safe out the way. Stay positive and stay on. Think about what you do. You feel me? I see this